just need to find a talk, and I just need to run it. Hello. My name is Joachim Čepický, and I am speaking here on behalf of Project Steering Committee of PyWPS project. The talk will be, of course, long. First, let me say you something for the introduction. What is PyWPS? Because some of you might not hear about it yet. PT. May I ask who is already using PyWPS right now? I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, about 10 hands. Nice, beautiful, thank you. The first time I met some PyWPS user in person, it was 2000, I believe, 8, Freiburg. And since then there are lots of more. It's the implementation of web processing service. We already heard about it. On the server side, and it's written in Python, purely in Python programming language. The project is, I wouldn't say old, I would say major. We started in 2006, and the first presentation was by chance in the FOSS4G in Lausanne. And PyWeb, since it is written in Python, it supports all the tools which are available there for the geospatial operations, and you can visit and find out more on pywps.org. What is pywps not? Because people used to, or they tend to have some expectations. But still, we hope that pywps is not complicated. And, well, users used to say us that this is really true, that pywps seem to be pretty easy to be used by them. pywps isn't a client for WPS processes, or whatever, or it doesn't include a client. It doesn't even include a graphical user interface. So everything has to be configured manually or using configuration files or programming files, of course. And it's not a finished server with complete pre-installed processes. If you ask me, can PyWPS do buffer process, or does it include a buffer process? The response would be no. But you can program it by yourself. It's a clean plate where you can use it for whatever you want. Okay, the last one was a little bit lie, because PyWPS actually includes buffer process for testing purposes and for documentation and demonstrating purposes, but it's not meant to include all possible processes which are out there. We already were introduced to web processing service. Just very short, it is very similar to the web feature or coverage service in the old days. That means that you can use the 3 request types, get capabilities, of course, and describe process for the metadata of the process, and execute, which will perform the execution on the server. And we have 3 types of input and output data. That means literal data. If I take the buffer example again, you need a literal data for the input buffer width or buffer size. Complex data, this is for the usually for the geospatial data, which can be, of course, raster and vector data. It can be more again, and bounding box. Yeah, this is more or less the picture demonstrates that there can be more processes available on the server, and you carry them by using those 3 requests, like get capabilities, describe, and finally execute. So one more, little bit more deeper, what is PyWPS? It's a communication bridge, or thin layer also. It fetches the data referred in the execute request, so they are fetched or stored on the server. It creates a container, whatever that means, but it creates a container for a process instance. Then it manages the processes, performs all the communication and reporting and login and stuff like that. And when the process is calculated, the data are either stored on the server or they are sent back to the client, and everything is cleaned afterwards, so that the server remains clean for other process instances. I already mentioned that we started in 2006, and yeah, we made it through all the years and versions, having some. There was also part of the code written in PHP for the client side, or JavaScript. We tried to implement that. We were working hardly on the documentation. We were lucky to have paid developers who were using in the projects, and we were adding constantly new features. The biggest break, we managed to have Google Summer of Code students as well, and we applied for not only Google Summer of Code, but also for OSGeo incubation during the years. And one of the biggest changes was that Tom Kralidis stood up and became a mentor for OSGeo incubation. That speeded up a lot the work. We also got finally PyWPS.org domain, which was held by someone else, but we have it now as a project steering committee. And we managed to release PyWPS version 4, which was rewritten from scratch. There were some backward compatibility changes and license change. We switched from GNU GPL to MIT. And this year we have again a Google Summer of Code student who is working hard on some features I will be presenting here. And we graduated as OSGeo project, finally, after 9 years of incubation. Let me tell you a little bit something about this big change, the PyWPS4. Why we started to write it? Well, PyWPS was 10 years old, and it was written with, I started with Python 2, maybe 2.4. So meanwhile, there was a Python 3 out there. There were new bindings for example, PyGraphs. There were new data formats suddenly popping out, like GeoJSON, KML, TopJSON. And there is, of course, the new version of the standard, of the web processing standard itself. And it turns out that the license we have chosen, the GNU GPL, isn't quite appropriate for our users' needs. You could compare it to QGIS. It's sometimes hard to write a QGIS plugin, and well, you should probably, if QGIS is published under GNU GPL, there are some consequences. Therefore, we switched to MIT, which is much easier. We used new technologies like LXML for XML parsing, Flask and Werkzeug for the service part, WSGA multiprocessing package, and others. Of course, popular Docker containers. One of the new features is data validation, finally. For the version 3 and older, we didn't take care, more or less, what GDAL was able to read and write. You could use it. Now, you can define a validation function and define a strictness, or how strict the validation should be done. We already have a set of validating functions for GML and S3 shapefile, and GeoJSON and GeoTIFF. Oh, nice. And you can make the validation as complex as possible, and therefore the process can be more robust. Something about process containerizing. Till now, the base approach is that PyWPS for the process instance, or if the client calls execute request, the PyWPS creates a directory, a container as a directory. Everything is done within this directory, and afterwards the directory is deleted, just like that. But this is, of course, not the most secure approach, and what we managed more or less to implement with help of one of the Google Summer of Code student was right now that there is a possibility that the process creates a Docker container, and everything happens within this Docker container, so that nobody can touch it. Yeah, speaking about asynchronous execution, we switched to multiprocessing module right now. That means that it should be working on Windows 2, but we don't have enough testers for this feature on this platform. But it helps us again, hopefully in the future to implement some of the features of the Web Processing Service 02 standard. Yeah. What's new for the upcoming version? Now we have the version 4.0.0, so what's happening in the new stable to be version 4.2? We completely have written output generation using templates, Jinja 2, very popular in Python. We already implemented some features of, or at least the scheme for WPS 2.0 standard, like get capabilities and describe process, and more will of course come. One of the required features was that that the file names on the input remain untouched, so that the author of the process can later rely on the names and the code is more readable. There is a new scheduler extension, and I actually have no big idea what it does because I never had the chance to test it by myself, but for those of you who are interested in the scheduler extension, I hope this is important information too. Yeah, and some tickets are still open, and there are more coming, of course, and but some more were already closed. And what is behind this 4.2 stable version? Of course, we are going to implement new features of the Web Processing Service 2 standard, like pausing the process, releasing it again, or deleting the running instance of the process. Docker will be used probably everywhere, all around everywhere. I would like to work on administrative web interface. I already did some attempts or tests using Django. We had a nice feature in the previous version that the output of the process wasn't only a file, but it could be a service, so we would like to have this back again. Of course, REST API. One of the features which is already in GitHub, but not tested yet, is that the outputs can be stored on some external buckets, some external services, and another option would be that all the data would be stored in databases. This is a project of this year's student for the Google Summer of Code, and of course we would like to support more languages than only English. Very brief about the OSGeo incubation. I already told you that we managed it to this year, and we shall be available again on the OSGeo Live for the next version. So for the OSGeo for Dar es Salaam, we should be there again. How the project is steered: we have project steering committee currently with 6 members. We have a roadmap, technical standards, release schedule, code review, stuff like that. And yeah, the monthly meetings, they don't happen that often anymore, but we are still in touch. If you want to be part of the community, so beside downloading and using PyWPS, you can join the mailing list, and there's also a Gitter online chat. We don't use IRC. And of course, I will be here for the sprint. There was a sprint in Bonn earlier this year, and wherever we go, we try to sprint. What we are constantly failing in is fundraising, because currently PyWPS is mostly financed by volunteers, or not financed, but the time is donated by volunteers, and it would be fine if we would find a way how to, well, get more money in the project. Very brief example, this is how you install it. That means that you do git clone or pip install everything. There is a setup py file, so installation should be very easy, and you run the Flask server. There are two important. One important file is the PyWPS CFG, the configuration file, and a directory with processes where all the processes are stored, and those are just Python scripts, which you are expected to be using. And this is an example of a process or Python script. It's a class, in this case area. You have to, of course, define inputs. You have to define outputs as well, and some process metadata. And at the bottom, there is one single function, so-called handler, which expects request and response. and this is how it could look like. So in our case, for example, we use Shapely library, open a file, even with subprocess, why not? Whoever prefers that, and calculate area of the features, and at the end, the response is returned back. So this is the thin layer between your process, and so PyWP has done a thin layer between this. This is your code. This is what you want to share. This is you want to expose to the internet, or probably not this with subprocess call. Yeah, that's all. Short and brief about PyWP's philosophy. You may see the logo. It's a bike. I came to this idea in, it was Freiburg again, 2008, and my presentation, my talk was directly after Benjamin's talk about 52 North WPS, where he was referring to 52 North as to big, powerful and mighty car, because, well, it's written in Java, that explains a lot. And I was there standing with PyWPS, the simple Python project. Okay, well, if 52 North is supposed to be car, then PyWPS has to be a bike. Because bike can be versatile, and everybody can adjust the bike to its needs, and it's pretty easy to repair. Now, this is my bike. This is how I used to travel to Phosphorgis with a backpack and, yeah, a bag for the computer. And this is Louis' bike. I don't have any picture of George's bike, but we totally have to put together bikes or picture of the bikes of all the project steering committee members at least. And you all know that bike can be large, it can bear a lot for a long distance, and you can repair it easily if something gets broken. And it's very easy to understand how it is working. It can be small again as well. It can be pretty cheap, built out of cartoon, but it can be expensive as well. Yeah, I was already saying that it can be rather simple as a single speed fixed gear, yeah, deadly bike, or pretty complex using full suspension and hydraulic brakes. And that's it. PyWPS can be whatever you want. It can be whatever you configure it to it, and the process can be as complex as you want as well. And it should be very easy to use. You should be able. You just have to mount the bike and pedal. That means write a few lines of Python code, and they will be exposed to the internet. Now question time. And I have questions at you because you might notice that I had here PyWPS t-shirts, and some of you even bought the t-shirts. I'm very thankful for that. Thank you. Because that means that I don't have to carry them at home and by myself, but still there are some t-shirts left. How they look like? There is a PyWPS logo here, and then there is a beautiful logo of the conference on the arm. And I have a question, and I have some women's sizes, by the way, as well, and some men's size as well, but I'm not going to tell you which times I'm going to hand over you. This is the first time a free software is giving over for free not only a software, but also something you can really take home. Some real swagger. So I have a question, and you have to shout, and whoever shouts at me first gets some t-shirt, and I'm going to decide which t-shirt you will have. So, okay, so I'm looking for some big man who will get woman S. So does PyWPS distribution include complete list of complex processes? No. Who was the first? He was first. Okay, thank you. So please come for the t-shirt. Yeah. You are lucky, you have man XL. It's no problem. Yeah, all the project steering committee members do have the t-shirt. Question number 2. Does it have any graphical user interface? No. Who was first? Well, he was first. Congratulations, you get a woman. M. Please take it. And last question. Some woman. Small. What standard does PyWPS implement? I hit from that corner somewhere. You, Thomas, great, congratulations. I hope it will suit to you, as it does to me. And thank you for your attention.
Yes, thank you very much, Joachim. And there's also time from questions from you, from the audience.
Yeah.
There's one.
This is the bad guy.
I hope for a difficult question.
He can do his by, yeah.
Hi, Joachim. How processing code is, by the way, passed to Docker container, and what are requirements on Docker image to use?
What are the requirements of the
Yeah,
Docker
like
image?
what Docker image needs to contain to support?
No, is well, George can give you another insight, but there are actually, as far as I know currently, two ways how you can use Docker and PyWPS. The first one is that you install PyWPS via Docker container, okay? Everything is included, you can just go on or maybe fix something within the Docker container. This is one thing. But the other thing we are going to do is that everything is set as usual, but in the backend, the Docker container is created on the fly. And then it is executed in separated containerized environments. So you as a user don't care that there is a Docker container being created. You don't have to create any Docker container so far. You just set in the configuration file, I want Docker to be used. Yes, another point, but valid question would be whether I can pass, for example, a Docker container to PyWPS and let the process be calculated within, right? And if I understand correctly, this would be one of the options of transactional web processing service, that you send a Docker there and it will be executed on the server. And we are not so far yet. Does it?
I'm not sure. So I didn't understood correctly. So my impression was that processes can be executed inside of Docker container, right?
Yeah.
Am I right?
Yeah.
So the question was how that code, a processing code, is passed to the container. Yeah.
Well, it has been some weeks since I saw the master thesis, but if I remember, the Docker container contains a copy of PyWPS itself. So the processes that you define on the WPS get replicated on this container, and then the container is launched when you call the first process itself. It's a bit clumsy, but it was a master thesis, and they were doing a bit of research on how to do it. So in the future, this is going to be a bit better optimized so that you have a container specialized on just getting the processes.
Exactly. Right now, there is a process chaining happening on the back end. Yeah. On the fly. More questions? Are there several? Wow.
So when thinking about putting a web process on the wild, in the web, the first question I have is about authentication. If there's some authentication mechanism built in PyWPS, or how would you do it?
Authentication. Well, it's OGC. So there is no much space for authentication. Or George, again? Come here, George. This will be much faster.
So the thing with authentication, Joachim talked about Flask. Basically, PyWPS is programmed Flask. So if you want authentication, you can simply integrate one of the Flask modules and implement the authentication initially, and then all the content, if it gets authentified, goes to PyWPS.
Thanks. Just a short addendum. There is also a proof of concept of using PyWPS to access all processing algorithms of QGIS through QGIS servers. The authentication is managed with QGIS server plugins written in Python, then use PyWPS to access all the algorithms that you have in processing. Just a bridge.
That was a question? No. Comment. Okay. There is one hand.
I only have got one more question about PyWPS, is that if there is many contributor publishing code or needing code for their own, would you imagine to create a repository so that people may share their code used by PyWPS, or?
You mean a repository of ready-to-be-used processes?
Yeah, for example, if you want to share
Of
your
course,
processes.
yeah, we would like to, if you would like to create some repository, I would support that. And that's all I can say. It can be part of the, not a part of the PyWPS source code, but we can create a separated repository for that. And of course, there used to be a PyWPS Grass.js bridge, which was using all the modules available in Grass. For example, Grass.js. It would be cool to have this feature back. Yeah.
Because just to add something, this bridge works extremely well, but the situation is that we are working now with Python 3, and Grass is still doesn't have proper bindings for Python 3, so we still have this issue. When I think that there's in the summer Google, there's now someone doing this, so probably by September we could start looking again at the PyWPS bridge.
Yep.
Yeah.
And just a little slight note, PyWPS currently supports Python 2.7 as well as Python 3. Yes.
And PyPy. No?
And PyPy. There is a hand.
Last question.
You say it.
Well, yeah, in the example of Yakim, you just open a process to bash and run a bash command. So if you have your process in another language, as long Python can somehow access it and make it run, then you can do whatever you want. The best approach sometimes is that, for example, you could have Golang, compile it as an executable or a library, and then simply send the request back and forward. As long Python connects or can send data back and forth, you can do almost everything.
Exactly. The process in the Python code has to be only 1 or 2 lines of code, which will call whatever you need to be called. Of course, well, theoretically you can call Java that way as well.
Yeah, so basically we need a wrapper, because if I have something not in Python, I need a kind of a wrapper to call it.
Wrapper, yeah, exactly. Yeah. And this is what PyWPS does. It's a thin layer wrapper, if you want, around your code, which will expose it to the internet using the standard.
Thank you.
So that's a good last word, wrapper. I need to wrap up this session. Thank you very much again. Here you see how committed they are to this project, and hopefully you'll also contribute to PyWPS.
Just note that we will have the group photo outside just after this session. Please join us.
Just about to announce that. Again, we have a group photo outside, and then we can have coffee. And again, thanks to the speakers.